Okay, we're beginning our 7th tape.
By the way, did I give you one of those?
No, but I'll...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you just take it.
So this today is March the 6th, 1993, and we're beginning our 7th tape, which means we've recorded 12 hours so far. And last week we were talking a little bit about Edna. We're talking about your father, and we were talking about, Father and Edith, and we were talking about that he decided to, he decided to be a widower the rest of his life. We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And during the week, I thought of something I'd want to ask you. Uncle George had talked about your father's health, the first part of his life. And George had said one time, the first 50 years, he said my dad was very sickly and we didn't think he was going to live several times. And he said the last 34 years he was remarkably healthy. Would you want to visit about that and the times and the health and the...
See, that would have brought it up to 1910, or see, Mother died in 1913. So after Mother's death, then he was a relatively healthy man. But up to that, while Mother was still living, he had several bad smells. And I can remember when he was laid up with well, he had a spell of rheumatic fever. He must have had a couple of those spells and similar illnesses through that period. So I would say that it would have been between 1905 and 1912 or so, when Mother was 1912. From then on, Mother was on her downward grade.
Mm-hmm.
So I can remember very distinctly his being decidedly ill on 2 occasions, and they were rheumatic fever on both occasions of some sort, variety. But in those days, I never paid enough attention to what the actual words were.
Was rheumatic fever fatal? Typhoid was it not?
Typhoid was, and he had had typhoid before because he, like so many of the other men out there, would drink irrigation water and get contaminated with typhoid germs that way. That's the way Warren Freestrom died. We talked about him. And these various illnesses that Dad had, I just knew he was sick and just accepted that fact and never tried to put him into any particular category of any kind.
I remember George telling the story of your father being deathly ill, nearly at death's point, and had sent for the doctor. And the doctor had come out like during the night and had met another neighbor and had asked, well, how's John Bengtson? And the neighbor said, oh, he's dead, you might as well go on home. And the doctor turned around and went home, never did show up.
That was that was in Iowa.
Oh, that was in Iowa?
I'm pretty positive of that he had come out from Bancroft, which was 12 miles away. But you see, we left Iowa in 1903, and I know he had had some illnesses up to that time. And I'm pretty positive that occasion was not in Longmont. I don't think that a Longmont doctor, we had 2 or 3, Dr. Bradley and Dr. I don't know if we had John Andrews. We might have had Charles Andrews. Charles Andrews was Dad's doctor, but I don't recall any of them coming out to see him, excepting Charles Andrews coming once or twice.
I think that story was from Iowa. But that would not have been typhoid fever. He didn't...
No, I think... I'm just not at all certain of what he might have had on that occasion. But I know I've heard that story about the fact that the doctor said, well, if he was gone, there was no point of him going, and so he went back home. And then in a day or so afterwards, then he found out that that was all just a false rumor. And then he came back out. And by that time, I think Dad was slightly better. And you can imagine what Mother put up with in those days. The neighbors talk. There were a few men that were dependable, like Jenny's husband, Louis Erickson, and John Pearson, the Pearson boys' father. They lived over closer towards church, and John Holcomb. They were Dad's two good friends. And the Holcomb boys, they were good friends of my brothers, the older brothers, so that they all fit together nicely. And John Pearson had Robert and Esther, his daughter. They were up there in George's category of age.
Okay, I just want.
At that time, you realize I was pretty much of a child, and I wouldn't comprehend very much about the various kinds of illnesses or how desperately sick Dad might have been.
George realized that, though.
George was older. See, he was 10 years older than I.
Because
and back in the turn of the century, George was 12 years old.
Because he told me several times that your dad was near death.
Yeah.
So your mother must have been just on the fear's edge all the time.
And that was a situation that Edith and I grew up with. I was 2 years old in 1900, and Edith was 4, slightly over 4. So you see that we lived through deathly illness most of our childhood life.
And you witnessed death among neighbors.
Yes.
You mentioned Neil Forbes and Warren.
And others.
What was the preacher name? Madison?
Warner.
Warner.
So we were close to that situation time and again. And that is a situation that scarcely any of my friends ever lived through.
Right.
I don't know how close we lived with death all those years. And the folks here, they try to tell you things. They haven't the remotest idea what they're talking about.
Only someone who's been through it can say, I understand.
Yeah.
So nobody can say that.
Sometime in the future, when some of these friends here will see these tapes and they'll wonder about it, they'll get an answer to some of their idiotic questions that they put to me in the days when they wanted sharp answers. And I didn't bother.
Well, in an earlier tape, we had talked about your feelings of death and
it was never anything that frightened me.
No, but it was a presence in your life.
It was present. It was an always present individual that was there.
An unwanted guest was at the door just about.
Yeah, that's it.
As we were having lunch today, we were talking, this last week I'd had a pretty bad case of the flu, and I'm not quite over it yet, but I was asking about flu shots.
But you do feel better now.
I feel quite a bit better. A big meal helped me.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're talking about flu shots, and you had your first epidemic of flu, or episode of flu back in, what, the 30s?
I think in 31, right after Christmas in 31, if I'm not mistaken, that was the year.
And that's affected you ever since?
That has had something to do with my life ever since, because this morning temperature that I had encountered all of these many years, that originated with the flu. And just when it became very prevalent, I don't know. But I know that I have always lived with it. And Dr. McFarland told me that, Dr. McFarland in Manhattan. And then I had Dr. Holwarda, whom you know something about, a fine doctor. And then Dr. Fuller, who was an equally fine doctor.
You mentioned that you think you had an inactive TB germ that you got from your mother.
Yes.
And Edith made a...
And I think I told you that, had visiting with Mrs. Samuelson in her bedroom once, and George told me that the Samuelson were very uncleanly people. This was Willie Samuelson's parents. And Mrs. Samuelson died not very long after this visit. So I can remember that. And there were quite a few of her grandchildren and grandnieces and nephews and so on that were and continued to be my good friends all as long as they lived.
And that's when your mother contacted TB.
George felt very certain that that's where she got the germ.
Right.
And as a result of that, she had it the rest of her life.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to, my point I want to make is that you felt that you had a form of the TB germ, whether it was inactive, but it stayed with you all your life, and that's why you have this morning fever.
I have this temperature, not every day by any means, but just occasionally I'll have a flare-up of it, and it's something that's just part of me, and I just disregard it.
Or like a low grade, one degree temperature maybe, or something?
Never any more than that. As far as I know, it's never any more than that.
And it took a while for the nurses here to figure it out.
Well, they never did figure it out. The word passed from one sensible nurse to another sensible nurse, and it gradually reached the one who was supposed to have asked the question in the first place.
Well, I thought that was interesting about the morning temperature, maybe as a result of the TB germ that never did fully get developed. I mean, it never...
I think so. We didn't know too much about TB in those. Then, of course, the doctor told, see, this was back there in it may have been, it undoubtedly was in 1902. And in the spring months, the doctor told Dad that Mother was not up to living in Iowa any longer. So that he and Mother and Edith and I left Sioux City back in the fall of 1902. Just how late in the fall it was, I don't know, but we came out to Colorado Springs, and we had a little cottage on the alley that was a coachman's cottage. Nobody lived in the mansion up front, but the coachman lived back here, and it was a very nice little 3-room cottage, and we were pleased to live there. But we were right on the alley. And then and we stayed there then until March, when Dad and Edith went back to Sweden.
Yes, we've kind of talked about that, covered that.
So that you know about Mother and I walking part way to the depot and then back again. And then Mother and I were there all summer long until they came. The rest of the family came then by the 3rd of November. We left Sioux City on October 31, 1903. I can remember the day as well as yesterday. I can remember going to the depot with the food that we stowed away for Dad and the boys on their trip out here.
I had a question I was really wanting to ask, and it's kind of jumped out of my mind.
It faded. It'll come back.
It'll come back.
Yeah.
I can't. It was.
That's the way it is with me, because they come in and go out so fast that I can't keep up with them.
It'll come back to me in a little bit. Well, I think we're ready to. We're back now in Kansas.
We're back in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we came here on Sunday, the 17th of February, and we all met out there at the Jenkins Spur on Monday morning, the 18th.
Mm-hmm.
And here was part of our belongings, part of it. I don't know if the furniture car was there yet. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Or we would have started to move in right away. But Edith and I stayed with the Albert Jenkinses some days yet.
Yeah, we've talked about that pretty much.
About that.
We talked about the first hot summer, and you were glad that your horse Prince was back in
Yeah.
Colorado.
We mentioned that.
We mentioned buying the land, getting settled, the cold and everything, and
Mhm.
and we've talked a little bit about starting at Bethany, the academy, and then Bethany College.
Uh-huh. See,
And
I started, that we came in February, so that by September, I was ready to enroll at Bethany Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And everything worked out nicely. There were some problems, but with the help of Dr. Pilwood and Professor Deere, things worked out very nicely for me.
Should we take this time now to talk any more about Bethany College, your experiences there, or?
I went on through academy, graduated in the spring of 1920. I could mention some of my good classmates like Ted Dorff and Torberg Brossi and some others.
Mm-hmm.
They were my classmates. But then we went on as freshmen in Bethany. We all came back, and we graduated in 24. Torberg didn't, because she had some illness and had to drop out. She didn't graduate till 25.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of us, and the Ostenburg boys, were our good friends in college, and Bernard Hawkinson, who was Mrs. Clarence Carlson's brother. Mr. Clarence Carlson here at Bethany home. He just died this past week or so. And there were others. Esther Nelson Sword, who, as far as I know, still lives in a rest home in Wichita. And then I had an extra good friend by the name of Ruth Smith, who came up from Achilles, Kansas, up in northwest Kansas, in one of those northwest counties. I'm not sure if it was which town it was closest to.
Mm-hmm.
But she and I were extremely good friends all through the years that I knew her, and I know she's been gone for many years.
Okay. I think on an earlier tape we talked about Dad, you mentioned, had been president of his class when he was a senior at Bethany. Wasn't he president of his class when he was a senior? My father.
Was he president?
Of the class? Didn't you mention that?
I don't.
Class president? He was student body president.
Your dad.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Linus was, he was president of the class. He was a member of the student council. I think it was the other way around. He was not the president of the class, he was the president of the student council. Yeah, that's the way it was. Because Walter Reed was president of the class. He was a congregational pastor's son. And his brother, Ralph Reed, worked for us out on the farm one of the seasons, and we got along very nicely with him. I've lost contact. Ralph was here, visited Messiah Church within the last couple of years, and he sat in the same pew with me at church, but I never knew who he was. And it wasn't until afterwards somebody told me who that gentleman was, but then it was too late. I made no contact with him.
So now Dad was an older student. He wasn't a real traditional student. He was quite your dad? Quite a few years older than his classmates.
Yeah, he was. When he enrolled at Bethany College, he had graduated from high school. See, that from the fall of 1920, and he had graduated from high school out in Longmont in 1914. So you see, he had been out of school for 6 years, and it was due to Helge Pubelad's urging that he came back to college. He decided. So Dad bought this house over on next to the corner there, northeast corner of town, on the way to the cemetery. And at that time, Reuben Hagstrand lived there in the corner house, and we bought the house next to it, facing west.
What year would that have been?
The fall of 1920.
I see.
So we moved in there one of the last days of August of that year.
And up until that time, had you all lived on the farm?
We had all lived on the farm from February 1918 till the last of August of 1920.
Okay, I never knew exactly when you bought that house.
Then George was there alone, and your dad would drive out, go out every weekend, sometimes during the week, but mostly just on Friday evening until Sunday evening, and work with George and assist him. George and Esther were married on the 29th of December 1920. And from that time on, up until then, every Saturday almost, I was out there with George, keeping house after a fashion, and producing satisfactory meals.
Now Edith was
in town with Dad.
From August on. From August of 1920.
From August, yeah.
That's when you bought the house in Harrison.
Yeah, and she stayed there in town with Dad all the time. And that, of course, was in line with the promise she had made with Mother to stay with Dad. And we all knew that the easier job was out on the farm with George.
Well, I'm surprised when you say the easier job. Was it difficult with your father? I mean, he was not an invalid.
No, no. Dad never was an invalid until the last 6 months.
It shouldn't have been a difficult task to take care of him.
No, it wasn't hard living in our family at all, because we all agreed very well.
And everyone pitched in, I would think.
Everybody had the same view in mind of making the best of everything and helping each other. That was the thought, being of help.
I didn't mean to take issue with that. No. I was curious about that statement. So
no, it's there aren't very many families that have had the pleasure of a fine relationship in the family that I have known. And with my brothers, my dad, and with Edith. And we didn't always agree. We sometimes disagreed violently. But that didn't upset the apple cart by any means.
No.
We got along. And I remember the boys, college boys, used to like to come over and visit with your dad, the Ostenburg boys. See, both Oscar and Joe worked for the boys on the farm. They were the two younger ones. Walter, of course, he worked for somebody else in town. But the boys there were no dumb plucks by any means. They were smart boys, and we were proud to have them as our good friends.
And when they came over the house, Dad had a room there in Harrison, did he?
Oh, he lived there. That was his home.
He did not live on the farm except summertime. He did, didn't he?
He'd be there off and on. Sometimes he'd stay the whole week. He still had a room on the farm.
So he went back, and we had two homes actually.
Yeah, he had two homes.
In the summertime, he was exclusively on the farm, I would guess.
Yeah, and that worked out nicely.
I'm going to soon ask about Dad going on to KU. You give me his, some of your...
Oh, yeah.
But first I was going to ask, when he was going to Bethany, because I'm interested, just maybe personal for myself. Dad was in a way, pretty sociable character. He met friends easily. On a trip, he would go off and start talking to a perfect stranger and have a wonderful time. But Dad didn't have many close friends later on, as I recall. He had like Ralph Carmichael. He had Carl Carlson the plumber was a very good friend. He may have had some others. I think Ted Palmquist was a good friend, and maybe Leonard. I'm not sure, but it tapered off pretty fast. Now, Dad, maybe was like you and I. Some people bore us, and we've talked about this. Now, Dad maybe wasn't antisocial, but sometimes he gave people the impression he was, and sometimes I think. Could you comment on that? Because
your dad was a very good friend of Frank Carlson and of Fritz too. Fritz, as crazy as he was, they were good friends. They'd had fun together. And Frank got married that first year with Elsie, and then they lived in our neighborhood, and we visited back and forth. And they, Braven and the girl Clara with Morn, and we continued always because Frank was one of Dad's pallbearers. And the Johnson boys, Esther's brothers, Ed and Emil, and Leonard a lot younger, but Ed had not lived at home for a number of years because there was Helga Johnson's father out east of town. I remember going straight on beyond the cemetery for a couple of miles, and that was where the Oscar Petersons lived, and these Johnsons. And I can remember so well that Ed worked there because the father was sick and dying, and he asked Ed to stay with the family and help them until his son, who was a little boy, less than 12 years old, I don't know just what, until he was able to take over. So Ed stayed with them. And Ed, of course, had a crazy outlook on life. You never could tell that he burst out laughing at the most incongruous times. That's one reason why Edith wouldn't allow him to be Dad's pallbearer. Emil and Frank were pallbearers. Edith very definitely said she wanted those two. And they both sang in the choir, and they were both good friends of Dad. And Ed, of course, he was a light-hearted person. He'd shrivel off everything. But years afterwards, then he jumped George about not having invited him to be Dad's pallbearer. And George said, "I thought you were." "Oh my, no." He was mad. And then George said something to me, I said, "Edith absolutely would not have Ed serve. She knew that she couldn't trust him." Well, at any rate, as time went on, Ed, the younger brother Leonard came along, and the two families remained very good friends always. At least Ed acted like he was a friend. As far as the rest of us were concerned, that didn't matter too much. But we always liked Emil, and Emil came here to Bethany home and lived his last few months here. I don't know what became of Ed when he died or anything.
Dad liked those brothers more than George did. George didn't care for those brothers. Did he, Edna, to be honest?
I think that would be right. George, they were his brothers-in-law, and he tried to be nice and pleasant in every way. But Leonard, the younger boy that married Adeline, I think he was on very good terms with him, and they enjoyed each other. But
George wasn't too tolerant, was he, in some ways?
No, I don't think so. George, if people just didn't suit him, he just kind of pushed them aside.
And he could be blunt, too.
Yes, he could. There wasn't any question of that.
I saw him walk up to Lund, who became the president of Bethany College. You remember when the first Sunday that Dr. Lund was president of Bethany College, he came to Bethany Church.
Oh.
And he smoked a cigarette after church. And I was watching. And George walked right up to him and said, "You shouldn't do that." Well, I mean, George said it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, he figured it was his right.
He had a right to say it.
But I mean, those things you just don't do those things in society.
Yeah.
I mean,
you just overlook those little faults and just ignore them.
Nowadays you'd say, you know, you shouldn't smoke because you're bothering everybody else. In those days, that wasn't the reason George told him.
No.
Nowadays, I think it would be good to say, hey, you're bothering everybody else's lungs.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be one of these days outlawed smoking everywhere, I think.
Sure.
But I remember seeing George doing that, and he would bring strawberries to his friends. Quarts after gallons of strawberries.
George was always bringing strawberries. Violet Howard, to this day, remembers George and his strawberries. Mm-hmm. And some others the same way.
He had a few non-paying customers around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The minister of the church and whoever it had to be. Well, anyway, we're kind of digressing a little bit. Mm-hmm. But the Johnson brothers were in a quartet with Dad. I think he mentioned Dad was in a quartet with Curly and Emil, and maybe one other boy. They had either a church quartet or they just traveled around.
The boys out in Smoky Hill,
excuse me,
they had what they called they had a mandolin club, and they all had mandolins, and there must have been at least 25 of them, and there were some of them were fairly young and some were middle-aged, but they had an awful lot of fun together. And it was a mighty good pastime for them to be doing that. And a lot of people didn't realize what a nice thing it was. The men grew up and they remained friends. And
what area was that? Smoky what?
Smoky Hill. That was a schoolhouse that was right close to Martin Anderson's. You know where Martin Anderson's lived? About a mile east of where Johnson's lived, and just around the corner.
Oh.
It couldn't have been more than a mile away.
Long since gone, that building.
How?
That building is long since gone.
Oh yeah, it's long.
Smoky Hill
Yeah.
School?
It was a fairly new building in those days.
I don't even remember it as a boy.
No,
It must have been gone back in the 40s.
I just don't remember when it disappeared. But you see, it took in all the boys. They called it Crazy Ridge. You know, out farther, I told you I drove out one day and came to Crazy Ridge all unexpectedly, and I didn't realize what it was that I ran into. I drove on the road past Johnson's and straight east until I was almost at, well, I think I must have been just about at Sweetsburg, and could look down. I came to a place and it was high, and I could look east, and down across the valley there was Roxbury.
Oh, and they call it Crazy Ridge?
They called themselves the Crazy Ridge Cowboys, and they were that mandolin club.
Now that road was that was south of the Roxbury Road that we call it now, isn't it?
It must have been a mile, at least 1 mile, possibly 2. I think it was just 1 mile south. I had a pretty good idea. I knew where I was all the time, but I was so surprised to think that I had suddenly encountered Crazy Ridge. Then later on, I met Carl in McPherson. He came out on the Santa Fe, and I met him in McPherson. And when we got in the car and was driving home, I said, "Now I'm going to bring you out past New Gotland." I turned off and we went over to New Gotland, and then we went north. "I'm going to bring you out on a road that I encountered lately." And I brought him up here to this corner. And Carl was so overtaken. He said, I've got to take a picture of this. He got out and walked around and he had the best time. And I said, well, I've heard a lot about it, but I have never known much about it firsthand. But I can't remember ever having seen the pictures that Carl took, but I know that he took some. And he enjoyed the ride immensely. And then when we had come there and turned west and came, it wasn't too far to, it couldn't have been as much as 10 miles back into town. Just how many miles it was, I don't know.
Okay, well, I want to get back to Dad and his days. During the time he was a student at Bethany, did he date the girls, or was he a loner? Was he more?
He was a loner mostly.
He was?
He had, I know that in his high school days and afterwards in Longmont, he had several very, very good friends among the girls. But I don't think anything serious ever turned out with any of it.
He didn't have a serious friend in college in Bethany that you remember?
Not, I think Esther Marie Johnson, who was from St. Francis area out in Kansas. She was, her brother was Johnson. There was one, he graduated in 1920. CG, his initials were CG, and I don't remember what his first name was, but at any rate, we liked him very much, and we felt very much at home with him. And Esther Marie, she still lives in New York City. I had a card from her at Christmas time, and I wrote back to her. I couldn't read her return address. I did after I had written to her, but I clipped it out on the and pasted it on the envelope when I wrote to her. So the post office took care of it. But at any rate, she wrote, and she had a couple sisters. See, she lived way out there in northwest Kansas, and she had a couple sisters who lived in the Denver area. And she would, after she had worked in New York City all these many years and was retiring, she went on out to Denver and spent quite a bit of time with these sisters.
Esther Marie did?
Yeah.
Did she ever marry?
No, she never was married.
And she was a good friend of Dad?
She was a very good friend. They got along just famously together. And both of them, they were what we call platonic friends. And she never had any interest in boys, and the two of them understood each other so well. And Esther Marie and I we still are good friends, but of course I don't get to see her anymore.
She'd be getting up there in age too, wouldn't she?
Well, I would say that she's past 90 now. I'm 95, so I think she'd be about 92. And as far as I know, she's still living.
Dad was probably one of the oldest, or one of the, if not the only, older student in the class, right?
Oh yes, yeah, there were some older boys that came to Bethany, but in our class, he was the oldest, and I think next to him perhaps was Walter Ostenberg, because all three Ostenbergs, and Joe was about my age. So you see that Walter was about, could have been 5 years younger than your dad. He could have been, but I don't know exactly how much.
Now, we talked earlier about Dad getting a grant to go to KU, or award or scholarship or something, and he went directly from Bethany to KU the next year.
I remember that in the spring, Professor Deere asked all those who were interested in the KU fellowship to meet with him. And there were about, we maybe were 4 or 5 girls. Esther Marie Johnson was one, and I think Mildred Anderson was still in school then, and then there were a couple more. And then your dad. None of the boys put in their application. And of course, your dad got Dr. Willeen and Dr. Deers okay, just like that. So there wasn't really much question about who would be the choice. So he got the KU fellowship and went the 25 year, 24, 25. And then he had worked so closely with Dr. Henry Brewster, who was a state food chemist, and he wanted him to come back. So he went back and spent another year working with him. And they had a lot of work in the state of Kansas, and some of the things that were disagreeable. For instance, there were people who had committed suicide or by accident had become killed by taking the wrong thing, and and consequently it wasn't very pleasant to know that you'd have to go and vouch for somebody's sanity who wanted to do a certain type of work or something like that. But your dad always, he escaped the sad part of it almost altogether because Dr. Brewster took it on himself. He didn't have to, your dad didn't have to show up in court any time.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. I didn't quite follow you.
He knew that there was the possibility, and he hoped that he didn't get called, and he didn't. It worked out very nicely for him, for which we were all glad to.
Yes, and Dad was 2 years then at Lawrence.
2 years at Lawrence. Then he told them that Dr. Brewster told him he didn't think he'd come back because he realized that George should have help on the farm.
Could Dad have come back again to work with him?
He could have gone back and done another stint.
I see. Was this a study program, or was it strictly salaried, or what?
See, after the first year, he wasn't paid by the fellowship funds at all. He was paid from the state of Kansas as Dr. Brewster's assistant.
I see.
And Dr. Brewster would have liked to have kept him the following years as his assistant also, but he didn't crowd him especially.
Okay, so the second year at KU, Dad did not take classes then, as you know.
Yeah.
He just worked there.
He worked there and earned a salary.
I see.
And then he came back because he realized that George wasn't too well, and George needed help. And I remember the first time it dawned on me that Lawrence Lundgren talked to me about it. And Lawrence Lundgren's brother, Art Lundgren, was the college professor in the commercial department. But Art Lundgren and we were very good friends and stayed that way as long as he lived. Then let's see, was there something else I should say in regard to that? I can't think right now. It's just like it was with you, it just kind of passed through.
Well, I do remember what I was going to ask, but that's a diversion.
It has been answered?
No, it'll come, I'll throw it in there sometime.
Oh, I see,
But, so Dad spent the second year as a non-student, just as an assistant.
Yeah, as an assistant.
And then he said he came back to help George farm. Now, was George farming the entire 400 acres?
The whole 400. The whole thing.
It must have been mostly wheat, though.
Yes, I think it was largely wheat.
But that would have been almost an enormous task for one man then.
Oh, sure it was. It was terrific.
Because he still had horses, he still weeded the whole... Of course, he probably didn't have too much corn, but I know George and Dad would have had some corn. They would have had some oats, and they would have had... Now, okay, when question. When Dad was working for Brewster at KU the second year, he did only during the school term. He didn't work during the summer either one of those years. He did work in the summer?
He was there a summer, and I think that you're right that he was with Dr. Brewster that summer. See, the two that he worked were Dr. Brewster and what was the name of the other one? It doesn't matter.
Well, how would George have been able to function during harvest?
I don't know.
Now, maybe they had, you said the Austenberg boys, and you had some others.
Austenberg, there were a few boys like that were so dependable.
But George was not mechanically minded. And I wonder, I'll bet he just simply almost threw up his hands.
No.
Because Dad was the one that kept the machinery going.
Yeah, I know that.
And George said, come on, now we go.
Yeah.
He'd yell to Dad, now go.
If it's all right.
You go, Vee.
Whether it was tied together with a handkerchief or not.
So I'll bet George had a dickens of a time without Dad on the farm with 400 acres.
Yeah.
Now, I do remember, though, Dad had mentioned that they had rented the East 80 to someone else part of those years.
Somebody that lived, one of those farmers over
They
there.
had just given up the East 80 because they couldn't handle it all. And they may have rented out another part. I don't know.
No.
Do you know that?
I don't think the farm was ever divided up until after they, until your, well, I think your dad and mother must have decided that they should divide the inheritance so that the girls each got an 80.
Well, I don't.
You got the 80, and then they kept the home 80 with and the 80 beside it. So then when Norman took over, he bought the 80 that he didn't, and then he rents.
I understand.
From the others.
Yeah, I'm not referring to that so much as whether or not George and Dad had helpers to rent some of the ground that they couldn't take care of. But I think Dad mentioned that the East 80, they had let some other farmers have for a couple years, and maybe they had done this during the time when Dad was in Lawrence.
It could have been.
To reduce George's work.
See that Emma Lillian's there next to him, or some like the Swensons across at the other east end of the section.
I'm going to ask you, would they have rented it to Emil and Ed clear across the river? That would have been a long way to travel. That seems to come to mind, but that's not the case.
They never rented out anything to the Johnsons.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think that it was one of the Swensons that rented. And besides David Swenson's father, who else lived over there?
I don't...
See, Walford Peterson lived down close to the river.
It would have been Frank Shields, the place that became the Holt place.
Frank Shields and that. But I think that it undoubtedly was Emma Lillian's area that faced the west there. Because Emma Lillian owned the quarter section, don't they?
Now, he may have rented to...
and then the next, the 80, the 80. There was another 80 in between there, wasn't there?
Between what? Emil Lillian's and...
Yeah, I don't...
And the 80 that I have now?
They'd have to...
No, it came right up to the hedgerow. Now, on the...
So he...
Now, on the north was Reuben Spongberg.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think they rented it to Reuben.
I'm pretty sure they didn't rent to Reuben. I don't think Reuben wanted it, and there was, but it.
Well, that really doesn't matter, and maybe we'll remember it. I was just curious because I can.
It's very likely it was David Swenson's father. That would have been Ernest's brother, Edwin or whatever it was his name. The two men had married sisters. They were the girls that they married were Swenson girls too, from out northwest of town.
Okay, so after Dad decided he needed to help George, then he came back after what, the fall of 27? Would that have been?
I think so. I think that's what it would be. It'd been 25 and 26.
In part of 27?
And it might have been in the summer of 20. Let's see, 25. 20.
Summer 27.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be 27.
If he were to have that second full year there.
Yeah.
And then Dad lived out there with George and Esther until he went back to Sweden
and was married
in 34. Did he start to keep company with my mom quite a bit before that, or?
I remember the first time I saw your mother. She hadn't been here so very long, and it was at a picnic, and she was playing with the youngsters, the grade school youngsters, playing baseball with them. And I remember somebody said that Mrs. Carl Francis' niece, and at that time she must have been about 15 years old.
That's the age she was when she came here. 15.
Yeah. And then after that, it didn't take us long until we became very well acquainted with her and were on very close relationship with her. And then when she got this school position and she taught down there at Beans, and she saved her money to go back to Sweden, and then your dad went back and they were married in Sweden at Lindesberg.
Yeah, I saw the records in Lindesberg in the church. I saw their signature of their marriage certificate. I thought that was interesting, going through all records.
I don't remember so much of his going to Sweden, but I can remember so well when they came back. And we had a lot to talk about when they got back. And then they lived in the little house across the street that belonged to the Bengtsons at that time.
Oh, across the street in Harrison?
Yeah.
I remember, you know, that door I'll never forget had this oval glass door. You remember that?
Well, they lived there the first year or two. I'm not sure just what. And then George and Esther left the farm completely and they moved out.
And then George and Esther moved into town for a short time.
And they lived in a little house in the middle of the block south of Messiah Church. It was a house, well, I know what the house is, but I can't localize who the people were there. But anyway, he lived there until one day in town, and I don't remember just what year it was. Dad was talking to C.A. Nelson, the real estate man. He was the father of the lady that married Swanson from the brickyard that had the furniture store. And Mr. Nelson said, "Your son just bought a nice piece of property." And he described where it was. And Dad, as first Dad knew about it. And we were still downtown, and Dad said, "I'd like to drive out and see what it was." We drove right out and saw. And Dad thought, that was a nice piece of property that he had bought. Was it 80 or a half section?
It was an 80.
An 80.
About that story, I'm going to tell something that Dad told me. And George didn't tell me this, but Dad told me this story, that when George got restless and he realized he had to have a farm again, he had found not a very good farm east of town, up in the hills. And he took Dad out there to look at it. And up and down the hills, and it wasn't terraced, but it was a lot of gullies, and in those days they didn't terrace. And Dad said, George, nope, we're not going to pull a combine out here. He said, I'm not going to pull a combine up these hills. You get yourself a flat piece of ground. Now, I don't know if you ever knew this story or not. Now, George asked Dad to go look at some farmland. He must not even have talked to your father. That's interesting.
No, my dad, he realized that he wasn't being the advisor anymore. That the boys were turning to each other mostly and asking the questions. They weren't involving him in the farm production at all.
But I always enjoyed that farm, that story, and maybe you never knew that.
But I know that after they had established, their dad was always very pleased to have George on that location.
Oh,
he thought it was just the place for him. And that it was nice to know that it wasn't far from town, and there was everything about it that was enjoyable. And how many years did they live there? Until Dr. Fuller said, I don't want, he told George, I don't want you out here another winter.
I think it was 73 when he went into Bethany Home.
Well, when he found that, he just listened.
Yes.
None of the rest of us had pushed the matter at all. But when Dr. Fuller said that, George listened. And he went into Chester Ridey right away and asked him. And the first location, Chester Ridey told him about it. And he moved in.
It's too bad they didn't have the cottages then, Edna, because George would have been much...
That would have been perfect setting for him.
Yes, it would have. But they just didn't have them because George was entirely too healthy to be in the Bethany home.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was. And George used to walk over to us there, walk to town, and stop in, have coffee, and then walk back in time to eat.
You know, an transition would have been if he could have found a real nice little apartment.
Yeah.
But I guess no one thought of that.
Well, I kind of think Edith must have thought about it, but we just didn't find or see anything that was available.
Edith wasn't living then.
Oh, Edith, no, that's
that was 73.
That was way after her days. No, we weren't any of us any help on that.
We probably just didn't think it out.
No, I don't think so. It just happened. It was one of those things that had been arranged beforehand.
Now I think we would have suggested some choices.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe
I'm sure. But I know that I felt that all the time, that George could have been in a location where he could have been on his own. And I thought of that after I lived over here so many times. And George thought about it too, because George would walk in, come over there, and I think that every Friday, if I'm not mistaken, he'd come over there for his noon meal, and sometimes an extra time during the week.
How long were you in those cottages before he died? A couple years?
What year did he die?
Wasn't it 81 or 80? 81?
81. Well, then I was there 2 years, because I moved in September, the 1st of September of 79.
Okay, he died, was it the...
He died in 80...
Was it February or March?
No, it's just a year ago. This is 93, yeah. Last...
Was it February?
Last February of 92, it would have been 10 years.
Was it 82 that he died?
He died in
82.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then he would have had a couple years to see those apartments. But at that time, it was probably too late to move in.
It was too late.
Because he wasn't so well then.
No, he was not very well. And he always was able to walk a little, and he would walk to town, and he'd stop in over there on Washington Street. And we just got used to the idea that George would come walking in on any occasion. And we'd always make sure that he had coffee and some rusks or something to eat. And we'd have a nice visit. But it was lonely, both for him and me. We got along beautifully together.
I don't know what transition or adjustment George made. I don't think he was very happy here, but he put up with it.
I think so too. And no, I know he maybe was less happy than I am. And that's something.
Well, we talked about that a little bit today too, and I don't know if we need to get in on that now.
I don't think we need to go through that. Between us,
we understand.
Taking care of that.
Yes. So, okay, and Edna, we've got about an hour. I'm going to stop and go refill a cup of coffee. Can we do that and come right back?
You want to shut it off?
Okay, we're back now after a little break. I have my 2 coffee cups full, so I can go another hour. If you can, Aunt Edna. I think you can go another hour more than I can.
Yeah, I'll live through it.
You'll do fine. We're starting our 14th hour of Edna's story, which I am anxious to get on tape and see. Let Edna
need not be the last hour.
Oh, certainly not.
We still have things that will come up in our thinking.
Oh, many. We're just getting started. Okay, during the break, I had asked you about giving your feelings of early days in Lindsborg. I know that, okay, when you came in 1918, there were, at that time, still only one church, or had Messiah Church been formed?
And Messiah Church was there.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, it had been there several years.
In the location where it is now?
And yes, and Dr. Pilblad was the vice pastor, had stayed with it for several years.
When did the Messiah Church break away from the...
I have a vague notion that it must have been along about 1912 or something like that. We came in 1918, and it was well established by that time. May have been along about 11 or 12 or something.
But it was understood that you would go to the big church, to Bethany, when you came.
Yeah, that there never was any question in our idea, because that's where Carl had gone. And of course he'd gotten pretty well indoctrinated with Dr. Verdine, and we were looking forward to knowing that illustrious guy a little better.
Okay, now I'm going to pursue this because I'm interested in some of the things you said. Break. His daughter Ruth Virgine, which became Ruth Built, she was my Sunday school teacher, incidentally, of course, a couple years when I was in high school. But anyway, she had made a statement to you about the Messiah Church. Can you say that? Can you tell me that?
Well, as I recall the incident, Edith and I told her that we were going over to Messiah Church for some special event. And she just burst out, "Heathening, Arna? The heathen?" And it jolted both of us, and then we laughed. We couldn't help but laugh. Such a preposterous thought. We didn't think much about it for a long time. Just let it go.
Was she a high school girl then? Would she have been a very young girl?
At that time, she was, I'm sure that she was teaching. She may even have gotten as far along as the teacher in the academy.
Really?
Because she got to be a teacher pretty early. She taught after she finished college. She and Helga Pilblad taught in little schools out in down towards Topeka way. In the I can't think of the Swedish communities down there, but I'm sure that both of them were involved in schools that were not far away from Topeka.
I see.
that were Augustana Lutheran.
Okay, but anyway, my question now would be, she was certainly mature enough to know what she said.
Well, of course she did, but
It was before you and your family transferred to Messiah. It would have been what, like in the late 20s? This might have been?
She might have said it. She might have said it in the middle 20s, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, and I was asking you, could this not have been the concept her father gave her?
Well, I think that it was more or less of a gossip type of thing. It was just something that she had heard and repeated.
You know, that's strange, because the Messiah Church and Bethany Church, they were of the same doctrine, they used the same hymnals, belonged to the same synod, 2 blocks apart, and one church would call the other heathens.
I don't understand.
Isn't that extremely judgmental?
It wasn't really so much the church, it was the members of the church. There were members in Messiah Church that were questionable in Ruth's idea, and Dr. Virgine's also.
Oh my word. Did he read the same New Testament that is printed now?
Of course.
Did he take it to heart?
Well, I don't know. I know that we mentioned it to Dad, and Dad was pretty shocked when he heard the comment, and we never said very much about it.
Well,
we never discussed that type of comment that was prevalent in Linford.
You know, Edna, I can understand why you would have gone to Messiah Church with that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
I certainly would endorse that.
Well, I see, by the time we moved over there, I had taught in Washington County, and I had taught in Riley County, I think, for several years. So I'd been going to Marydoll to church mostly, or to the Methodist church in town. And you know, when we lived in Longmont, I want to say this, that my brothers, they had a lot of friends in Longmont High, and we were without a pastor there off and on through the years after Pastor Boleyn had moved away to Boulder or somewhere else, and Pastor Olean had left us. But at any rate, I know that we were quite vacant, and we had Martin Odell, and we had Arthur Peterson as student pastors, and they were Martin Odell was from this area, Peterson was from up in Nebraska, and we had gotten used to the idea of visiting. Now, my brothers would like to go where their high school friends were. So they often went to the Presbyterian church, Dr. Robertson's church, or they would go to the Methodist church next door there. And since I told you that the Methodist pastor's sister was such a top-notch teacher at Longmont High, they kind of had strong feelings there. And I don't know, Dad and Dr. Markley, the congregational pastor, were very, very good friends. So we,
excuse me,
we would often like to go to the congregational church.
So your dad was more tolerant of other faiths and other beliefs.
Yeah.
Could this not have been a reason he just couldn't take that? Didn't this Virgin smack of arrogance and superiority, and didn't he fostered that?
He fostered it.
Did he not? Because that's my question I'm going to ask you.
Well, that's perfectly safe, because I know, I heard Dad saying it in so many words that he didn't appreciate Dr. Regine's attitude toward some of the other churches. He didn't like it.
Mention the other churches. There was a Covenant Church.
There was the Covenant Church and the Methodist Church here in town.
Did Virgin feel that Bethany Lutheran was
They
way above the others?
They weren't Bethany Lutheran.
They were below.
And it was it.
Okay, now, at the same token, some members of the Covenant Church didn't have much use for the Lutherans in town.
No, of
Can you
course not.
talk about that,
Well,
in your opinion?
I would think, in my own way of thinking, it would be that they would be kind of pushed off on a shelf by themselves, and who was responsible for it? Maybe the Covenant, earlier Covenant pastors had said things similar. I don't know at all. I know there was one pastor who was a classmate of my brother Carl in college days. He came here and he took college work and graduated. And so I don't know exactly. I couldn't say at all when it originated, when it became a common feeling. But I know that it was rather prevalent in the days after we came here. And Dr. Virgine's two older daughters didn't hesitate at all in putting the other congregations in their place.
Besides Ruth, there's Esther?
Ruth and Esther was the oldest, and then Ruth. I know Adele and Ruth.
Who?
Esther was younger.
You say Adele?
Adele.
I didn't know her.
Adele was Carl's classmate in college.
Did she get married?
She graduated in 1915,
And
and she married Clarence Stone, who was, I think that he had, back in the background, he had pretty close connections with the Covenant Church. I don't know, but he was a member of Bethany Church at the time they were married.
he was not a minister.
Oh no, he was just a common, ordinary
Well,
businessman in town.
well, now how come just an ordinary businessman would be good enough for Virgine's daughter? Wasn't that kind of strange?
Because, I shouldn't say this out loud, but nobody else had taken a liking to Dr. Virgine's daughters. And Ruth's husband-to-be was Dave Engberg, who had his family background in some other community in Kansas, not here.
Was he a minister?
He became a minister. And then as time went on, he was out in Idaho, and he drowned in one of those rivers out there. But they had been married for several years then.
Had they had children at that point?
They had, I kind of think they had their oldest daughter at least. But I know that they were several of the, after a meeting out there, because Dave had been working in, I think maybe in the church at Troy, Idaho, and they had a meeting, and then the men had gone out to fish, and Dave and a couple of the other, whether some of them perhaps were already ordained, but Dave wasn't. Yes, he was. Yes, they had been ordained. They had been married for a while. But at any rate, they were out by the river, and it was very turbulent. And Dave was fascinated. He kept looking at the water, and he said, "I wonder what it would feel like to get caught in that."
Oh,
I remember hearing one of the men who was there and heard him say it, one of the pastors, that Dave was so overcome with the strength of the river that he just couldn't quite figure it out. He said, "I wonder what it would be like to get..."
Did he jump into the current?
No, he was fishing, and they were walking along a stream, and somehow or other he lost his footing and rolled in.
Oh my.
And
it's like self-fulfilling prophecy.
That was that.
Oh my. Well, he found out, didn't he?
He found out. I think this was, it must have been the man, I kind of think it must have been one of the Peterson boys from Nebraska, one of them that was our pastor assistant out in Longmont. I think he reported this conversation. He may have been there because he afterwards was out in Colorado, and Reuben Friedstrom and he became very good friends as time went on. I know that he spoke at their Christmas Swedish program out there once or twice, but he was from central Nebraska.
Okay, have we spoken enough about the church feeling or difference or whatever? I remember as a boy, I felt it. I felt it in the 50s. And I felt that there was, which I didn't understand. My father and mother did not teach us to feel discriminating in any way. They didn't. They were both very open-minded, non-judgmental in my opinion.
No.
Now, I don't feel that way about Uncle George.
No.
And I don't feel that way about your sister Edith.
Well, I'll tell you, they were, you see that they had already acquired some of that feeling. If Carl had had anything to do with it or not.
But you feel that your father was not.
I never felt that. I remember so well that Dad said that he remembered the time when the distinction between the Covenant people and the Lutherans back in Iowa, way back in the 90s, was not at the highest level by any means.
You mean the camaraderie or the friendship?
And then there had been the leader from Sweden that came to visit. Waldenström came to visit, and he visited in Sweden among some of those people that were swaying between the two things, and he naturally just won them over to the Covenant Church. Now, I can't remember that they ever established a Covenant Church in the vicinity of Zion Lutheran, our old home area.
Can I ask you, would their members have been from the Lutheran faith? They would have proselyted from the Lutherans? Probably?
They could have. I just don't know. See, I wasn't old enough to pay much attention in those days. But I was thinking of something else in regard to that. When we came to this, that when we came here, we knew that there was a feeling between Dr. Virgine's family and whoever. Dr. Pilblad, of course, was in Messiah.
Was he a permanent pastor?
No, he was the one that took over and led the congregation in the early days when after they'd had Pastor Olander, who afterwards was in the far New England area.
Oh, they didn't have a minister for a while.
They didn't have a regular minister, and that's when Dr. Pilblad was the leader.
He's he was also at the college.
He was president of the college.
Ernest, what's his name? Was it Ernest?
Ernst Pilblad. And
he filled in as their minister.
He what?
He filled in as a minister.
And as a minister.
Could this be the beginning time? See, the Messiah Church was always thought of as the college church.
Yeah.
Campus, church on campus.
The reason for that was that so many of the leaders in the church were college people. They were professors.
Was this a problem in the towns with townspeople?
I don't think so. They just knew that there were a number of people who didn't feel at home in Bethany Church.
Could Virgin have alienated some of the college people?
He could very easily have done that.
Now, he was a very strong-minded and
very staunch Lutheran.
Maybe he thought that he was smarter than the professors. I'm just throwing out some.
And as far as I'm concerned, I don't doubt at all that he wasn't, because Dr. Virgin was a brilliant man.
Yes, and he maybe let people know it.
Yeah, I don't think.
I'm not trying to elicit a comment.
Any question of that he let us know that he was brilliant. And George was one of those who wouldn't have questioned Dr. Virgin. He'd follow in his footsteps. He wouldn't quarrel with him.
I can understand. But your father would question.
But
Your dad would question that.
I think so.
I admire that.
Because he'd had so much experience in Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But George wasn't old enough to have any experience.
Now, I always got the impression, and from my dad, in a way, that your father and you and Edith left Bethany Church because of an argument, and Dad, in a way, thought that your father had a real temper. And he just might have up and got mad and told Virginia off and decided to go to Messiah Church. But hearing your side, it sounds like Virginia is an autocratic, it was his way or nothing, probably. And your dad just thought, I would like to have a chance to think of it in an open way.
I don't think that what you, the suggestion that Dad and Dr. Virginia came to an open break by any means at all. I think they remained friends as long as either one of them lived, and they both died within a half year of each other.
I see.
And I know that Dad would sometimes quote Dr. Virginia, and then he'd laugh.
Never making fun of him, probably.
Just being amused that he couldn't see beyond his own private opinion. That was it. That's my feeling. I was always an outsider, and I was just overhearing now and then. And I don't think Edith ever quarreled with Dad. She didn't encourage him. She just listened.
So you would say your feeling is your dad was quite open-minded.
I think so. I have always felt that he was genuinely open-minded.
Well, that's refreshing, because I'm telling you the feeling I had from Dad. Now, it may not have been accurate. It was just what I had, the feeling I had.
No,
I'm going to ask you about something else. When do you recall that the Main Street was bricked in Lindsborg? In the early 20s?
That it was paved?
Paved with brick. In the 20s?
The first pavement was the one block down in town. Now whether it was north or south of Lincoln, I'm not sure. It must have been the block north of Lincoln. One block of pavement.
The main
Street.
One block.
One block.
Would that have been early 20s?
I rather imagine that it would have to have been in my college days. I'm pretty sure of that.
You don't recall how it was done?
I can't remember anything especially.
Well, the reason I'm asking is I've heard the story that most of the Main Street, now the bricks went clear up to the water tower now, I think. I mean, and several of the side streets, there's an enormous amount of bricks laid. Now, I don't know what time, and I don't know if the story's true, but that there was an exceptionally fine bricklayer that did almost all the physical work. The bricks were brought to him, and he was just like a machine. And he was a black man from Salina. And the story is that he could come into town early in the morning. They would drive him in. He would work most of the day, and he'd have assistants. And his arms were just flying, and the bed had been prepared, and he knew exactly how to put these bricks in and form them. And that he had to leave Lindsborg before sundown because they would not allow a black man to stay in Lindsborg overnight.
Yeah.
That's the story. He was good enough to build the street, but he wasn't good enough to stay in town. The reason I'm asking this, I don't know if the story is true or not, but did that portray the feeling of not only prejudice toward blacks, could it have been prejudice toward other religions or not? And see, the Covenants were not another religion. The Methodists were another religion. They were a very small deviation.
Sure.
But yet, you see what I'm saying? They made, Edna, they built a gulf out of a little creek.
Yeah.
Didn't they?
Sure they did. Sure they did.
They built a chasm out of a little rut in the road. Can you explain why this feeling was?
What you're telling me now, I had never heard it spoken of in this fashion, but I've heard similar allusions that those things were talked about. So I know there must have been common ground for that type of thinking.
Okay. Earlier we sat in a car and visited. We hardly ever got back in or talked. We talked about changes that have been made the last few years. Some are good, some are bad. We talked about changes. Women have more rights. Their civil rights, their workers' rights, human rights. The Berlin Wall or the Iron Curtain fell down. I think around the world there are more rights and aware of people's rights. In this respect, I think the world's changed a lot in the last few years. I'm not sure of the question I'm going to ask. There wasn't as much fresh thinking in those days. Didn't it come about slowly? In other words, we had Martin Luther King, we had John Kennedy, we had other people that stirred people's thinking.
It came from outside sources. I can't remember that there was much talk about it here in town. Maybe I wasn't in connection with the right people who would be apt to be talking about those problems.
Is it possible that it was just accepted that a black man was not willing? What I'm saying is, maybe it was just the thing that was done. They didn't even question it, whether it was right or wrong.
Well, I just, Edith and I, we always thought of that event that happened in our college days when the Ottawa University boys came over to play basketball, and there was a Negro on the team. And they must have played in the afternoon if he wasn't allowed to see the dark here. But at any rate, the team came into town down and was going to eat, and the people told him they couldn't serve him. And
can you tell me about what year? Would this be in the 20s?
Well, it has to be in the early 20s.
When you were in school.
We graduated in 24.
Right, between 20 and 24.
And Walter Ostenberg didn't become a leader until about our junior year. He came from Marquette. But I know this, that Edith told me that Walter heard that this happened, and he immediately went and searched out and found the boy, and he says, "You come with me." And he brought him, and they went to a cafe, and they went in and sat down, and Walter ordered a meal for both of them. And what he said to the waitress, I don't know, but she didn't question him. She served him.
Yes, we had leaders in those days.
Yeah. And from that time on, I know Edith and I had a strong admiration for Walter Ostenberg. We'd always liked him, but from that time on, there wasn't any question that he was leader among the teachers in Kansas.
Yes, he became a superintendent.
He became.
Were both his brothers superintendents? Joe was.
Oscar was the coach here in town, and Joe became a superintendent in one of the lesser towns, and I can't remember which one. Walter was farther. He was down at El Dorado or somewhere down in that area.
Well, one became superintendent of McPherson, and one became superintendent of Salina during the same time. Is that not true?
That I've never heard.
You haven't?
I've never heard. Joe, I imagine, maybe did get a top notch, but I have no recollection of it myself. And Walter eventually became the top man in Salina.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The superintendent in Salina?
Yeah,
that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah. And Oscar, of course, he never was anything higher than a coach.
Are you saying Joe was not superintendent in McPherson?
He, as far as I know, he may have been, but I don't have any recollection of it.
That's an aside. I don't. That really doesn't matter. But they were very much leaders in the education.
Yes, they were. Especially those two. Now, Oscar didn't go in for that type of leadership. He was in the athletic field. He followed in the steps of his brother-in-law, Cash Carlson, who was such a good coach at Bethany and elsewhere.
And incidentally, a good friend of Dad.
Yeah, he's a fellow that had the farm out, and he, his father, they lived on the farm across from the company house in the field back there. That was the Carlson property.
Mm-hmm.
See, the company farm, that is where Mrs. Walden Peterson's mother lived, Johnson's.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to say about those early years in Lindsborg? I don't know if I asked the right questions, but I wanted to probe enough to find out so future years, and 100 years from now, people will understand how they felt.
You have asked questions that I wouldn't have thought of because I never was that deeply involved with all of this, and I'm glad to answer them as best as I know how. I know that with Edith and me, Cash Carlson's sister Ruby and Eleanor, they were very, very close friends of ours. They were Bethany graduates. And then there were a couple of brothers that never went to college, never went to school at all. But Cash, and even in college days we were friends, but as time went on, and he and your dad had land out there in Hamilton County, and whenever Cash had come home, he'd stop in and report how your dad was doing. Or, it was the other way too, your dad would stop in and talk with the Carlsons, or with one of the girls or something, and report things.
Now, was Cash a single man?
Huh?
Was he married or single at that time?
He was single at that time.
Quite a bit younger. He was quite a bit younger than Dad, wasn't he?
He what?
Quite a bit younger than my father.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you see, Dad had been out of high school 6 years. So there had to be at least 6 years difference in them.
Okay.
About just how much, I don't know. But they were always very, very good friends. And whenever I would go to Topeka or anywhere for any of our big state meetings, because I would go every now and then, I'd be apt to run into Cash on the street, and we'd have a real nice visit. We'd have a lot of fun together, and then we'd go about our business. And I know, I can remember, I can see him sitting here just as well as now, how he came over to us there on Washington Street and report what he had talked with your dad about out there.
Harrison Street, I think you mean.
Yeah, on Harrison Street.
Okay. I would like to spend we have about 15 minutes on this tape, 15 or 20 minutes. I want to ask some other things about the early town. You talked about 6 grocery stores, 6 hardware stores. Is there anything that you want to any reflections you want to talk about the early city?
When we came here in 1918, I came to town so very, very little. And some of those comments about the stores, they just repeated conversations that somebody else had said. So I don't know to what extent I heard it said in our family, that thing, but I know that it was something that must have been said in town.
About what? I'm sorry.
About the stores being so. I remember definitely that there were 6 hardware stores.
I see.
But I've forgotten what they were. But I know that. And the grocery stores, Rundeck's, we never went to Rundeck's until, the middle 20s. We didn't start to go there. And until.
What store did you go to?
We went to, what were the stores? I just can't remember what store was on the east side. And there was a store down in the lower block. I just don't remember what the stores were.
There were a couple of drugstores? Or
There was the drugstore on the west side and the drugstore on the east side. Those were always there. Those were always there.
What was the one called on the west side?
That's what I was trying to
Well, I'm trying to think too, because I should...
What was the one on the east side?
Well, later on Liscombe had it, but...
But before him.
I don't know. And on the one John Anderson had, as you walked in the drugstore, the name was in the mosaic.
Yeah.
Little white tile.
And I think it is on the west side also.
No,
the one on the west side is Tarbury.
Yes, but it's no longer, and that's been destroyed. But there, as a boy, I'll think of that.
Quarrelsome businessmen never interested me. I never listened to those stories enough to repeat them scarcely. If they didn't get along, they didn't get along. That was their business.
Now there were dry goods stores and there were restaurants, I presume, and in other words, it just didn't interest you that much, the town.
And well, I didn't come to town to eat for one thing, and if we did, we'd go to the hotel. And I don't know that I personally was ever involved in anything that bothered any of the people. I just never paid any attention to that, and I don't think it must have bothered Dad very much because I don't remember his talking about it.
Okay, so you don't have a lot of impressions of the town as such. Now the hotel, which was the Brunswick.
The Brunswick.
That was a real elegant building then, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the old building. And that's, at that time, the Whittles lived there, and Mrs. Whittle was a Shields.
And they operated the hotel?
They operated the hotel. And then, as time went on, they sold up to somebody else, and I don't remember who that was. And I lost connection with the hotel altogether. And then they built a little hotel there at the corner on Main and Lincoln,
which became the Carlton? The Carlton Hotel?
Was that the Carlton?
Well, it wasn't right on the corner, was it?
No, the Carlton was a little farther south, wasn't it? In the block, in the middle of the block.
Farther west.
Or a little farther west.
But was there a hotel right on the corner?
Huh?
Was there a hotel on the corner?
Well, I think there was a drugstore on the corner, but there were hotel rooms upstairs. I think. But as far as I can remember, I never paid much attention.
Well, we
never got ourselves involved in little petty quarrels in town.
No, I'm not referring to petty quarrels. I'm just asking these questions.
I know that. But since I know so precious little, I remember so little, it might come to me in my dreams tonight. I don't know.
Okay. I was going to ask another question here. Is there anything else you want to visit about? When did the theater came in the, 30s or 20s?
No, I think it must have come in the 30s. I don't think I was anywhere around when the theater first came in. And I don't know who was responsible or anything about it.
I think that caused quite a controversy.
I know it did. I had a vague notion that there was quite a controversy. But what they were quarreling about, I don't know. Just the idea of having it.
Well, Dad, once again, I think told me that your brother George was violently opposed to that. He thought it would bring in a decadent society. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's the feeling.
I can see that if there was any quarrel from back in Iowa along that line, it would prevail. both George and Dad would remember it too well. But as far as I'm concerned, I have no recollection of anything like that. And since I graduated in 24 and then was gone completely for 3 years, and then I was home a year, and then I was back again. You can see that that dissociated me with the town and the general trend of thought. I just never heard it. So I couldn't repeat anything sensibly.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things. One other thing, you don't recall any foreign students at Bethany in those early years?
Any?
Foreign students other than, I mean, there were no black students.
I don't know that they ever had any black students until Nelson Williams.
Well, no.
Because that, he tells me now that it was I that encouraged him to come to Bethany.
Well, he was one of the early ones.
I know that.
But when I was, now he was a year after me. I started in 57. But when I came, there was one black student, and he was from Africa, Anza Aman
Oh
Lima,
yeah, Anza Aman.
who's now a leader in the church. But he was from Tanganyika at the time, Tanzania. And
our missionaries sent him.
Yes. Now, Edna, it was okay for him to be here in Lindsborg because he was an African. That's how they got around it.
Yeah.
And everyone accepted him, and he looked like an, I remember seeing him.
Yeah.
He looked like he did not look like an American black.
No.
He dressed differently. He looked like a tribal leader, a young tribal boy. I mean, he was, and so it was okay to be an African, but I don't think they had ever taken any American black students.
See, Elmer Danielson and Lillian. Lillian, of course, is a Bethany graduate, and Elmer, I guess he was too. But at any rate, this man from Africa got their backing, and whoever they would bring in.
Yes.
But Edith, I remember Edith telling this, when Lawrence Danielson was a senior in high school here, you could about figure out when that was. The basketball team was playing, and there was if it was Ottawa University or what it was, but the black boy that played on the team, he was teamed up against Lawrence Daniels. Lawrence. Edith Leff says Lawrence was good enough to play against the black guy, but the rest of them weren't.
Oh, really?
They wanted to avoid that clash.
Isn't that something? They didn't want to have any physical contact.
They knew that they'd be safer in every kind of way if Lawrence would play against him, because there wouldn't be any quarrel. But if any of the other boys, without asking their parents, would be set up to play against this Negro, there would have been contention right away.
Was this at college?
This was
or high school?
This was high school.
Oh.
This was high school when Lawrence was a senior in high school.
Was this in tournament play or something?
I think so. I think very likely it was tournament
Lawrence
play.
Danielson. He would have. I'm trying to think who he would he have been around Dave Anderson, Kenny Forsberg's time?
I kind of think so.
How about Bill Carlson? In that, would he be Bill?
I think he was ahead of Bill Carlson, wasn't he?
See, I don't remember Lawrence.
No, I kind of think.
Was he the oldest, Danielson?
He's the oldest, yeah.
Okay,
So
see.
he was born in Africa.
Okay, Luella was my age. And then Lou was 2 years older. And then, I don't know who, Eleanor, was there an Eleanor?
Eleanor was the oldest sister. She was next to Lawrence. And then Evelyn was the third. And then Luella. And then the boy. I can't think.
Well, yes, the young boy.
The younger boy.
I don't even remember his name.
And then Lois. That was the Danielson family.
Well, I would guess that Lawrence would have been in the age of Kenny Forsberg, or
I think so.
And he was the only one they would allow to guard the...
They had, Edith laughed about it and said, now if somebody had said it to Edith, or but that they had teamed him up against the Negro boy.
Because he'd experienced being with blacks.
He wasn't quarrelsome with them.
He'd grown up with them in Africa.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange? That's an interesting story. That is really...
Certainly.
That would have been in the 40s, Edna. I'm sure.
Yeah. It took quite some years before the resentment against the color contingent died down.
If it were that strong here, what must it have been in other places?
Yeah. And I don't know, I never was home long enough for people ever to confront me with a black, but the story must have come home that wherever I was teaching, I was on such good terms with the Negroes.
You accepted them, and they knew it.
They knew it, and the people there knew it. Ellsworth never quarreled. The people in Downs, I remember Nelson, after he was teaching in Ellsworth, he had been up to Downs. I said, what connection do you have with Downs? Oh, he said, my grandparents lived there. And I said, who were they? Well, here they were, I had the brother and the two sisters
Is that right?
in school, and they had moved back from Nicodemus to Downs. And for me, wherever I was, people just instinctively knew that that teacher is not a quarrelsome one as far as the Negroes are concerned.
No.
And Father Bob knew that when he saw me at Ellsworth. He knew that when he was working on St. Francis, there was somebody that wasn't going to quarrel. And some of the other teachers, they just dreaded the thought of having St. Francis come in.
Oh. Well, could it have been the reason that people in those early years maybe were not intent on being prejudiced? It was just easier to go along with the flow. If everyone else believed that, could that be a reason?
Well, I think that, as you say, go along with the crowd. It's often easier say nothing and just let it drift. As far as I was concerned, I always had an opinion, and I never hesitated in saying it. And
like Walter Ostenberg stepped to the front and said, he's going to eat a meal here. There's always been leaders to step forward.
And all of the students. Now, when I was in the Blue Valley, there was only this Fouts family, and they worked for Hawkinson's in their fields. And Mr. Hawkinson went to the state as a senator, and he had the two youngest children, Elna and Averill. They were my students in school, and Averill kidded me about that I was so annoyed with the Negro boy. I said I wasn't annoyed with him. I said he was lazy and I was trying to awaken him.
It had nothing to do about his color.
It had nothing to do with his color.
And didn't they understand? She didn't understand that.
Well, I think that after I told Averill that, he was wise enough to catch on.
Oh.
And he knew that I wasn't quarreling with the boy because of his color.
You wanted to motivate him.
Yeah, I just wanted him to be a smart boy.
Right. Isn't that?
And Averill afterwards, his wife died, and then after several years, he met Donna Johnson, whose husband actually had died, and they were married. And they were students together, I lived with Donna Johnson's people in their big house in town, and I knew the Hawkinsons out from Springside, and they were good friends. And everything just worked out beautifully together. We never quarreled about things, and they all knew that I was not one that was quarreling about color.
No. People can sense that.
And I have said it so many times that Mother was just deathly scared of the Negroes and said, don't ever talk to a Negro. And I just listened to her, and then I thought to myself, well, if Negroes are so terrible, how come the Dad can be such good friends with the black men on the train?
Uh-huh. Had your mother had a bad experience?
I don't know. I think that her brothers, perhaps her brother, they had lived in Omaha a short while, and her two older brothers, John and Sanford, they could have had some bad experience with Negroes that I don't know anything about. You just don't know the background at all. But Mother, she had learned it very definitely firsthand. Don't have anything to do with them.
Mm-hmm. Now, this smacks of George's feelings. George told me, and he felt the same way toward not only blacks, but Catholics and Masons and Mormons and people that he didn't really trust, Jews, and George was more bigoted, in my opinion. Is this not true?
I think so too.
And I'm not trying to attack him, you understand, but
I want to say this about, in Longmont, we had several fine clothing stores. The Shies were Jews. The Woolses were Jews. The meat market Showers, and I don't know about the Braggs. That was a meat market also. But downtown, I wasn't too familiar with the people, but I know that those where the Jews prevailed in the family. Now George was in high school, and the Shies were his good friends. The Showers were.
I'm just wondering where he got that idea.
I don't know. I don't know. And Dad was very, very good friend with Mr. Bragg, and there were 6 sons in each of those 3 families. Now I think there was a 4th family where there was 6.
Maybe George wasn't so prejudiced toward ethnic groups as he was toward other religions. Could that be possible?
I think that's very, very possible.
Okay.
That he just took them en masse, but that he undoubtedly was prejudiced against just limited groups.
But I wondered if he got that from your mother, who said, don't have anything to do with blacks.
I don't think that Mother was in Omaha long enough to acquire any feelings like that. And then she was in Algona until she was married, and she was 22, and she had only been in the United States 3 years. She couldn't have acquired very strong opinions.
No. She had never probably had that much to do with any blacks.
I don't think so. I just don't think. Mother didn't speak English well enough to have had much contact with anybody.
Always in your family with your mother, you spoke Swedish. Is that true?
In the family,
yes.
We always spoke Swedish to each other. And
when did you start speaking English as a family? Here in Lindsborg?
I think so. I don't think that we ever spoke as a family conversation until we were here.
Was that kind of just a gradual transition?
I think so. I can't remember in Longmont. I think we were speaking Swedish in Longmont as long as we were there. And it wasn't until we started college and got out of that. See, I went to Fort Collins 1 year, and then I came to Bethany.
Yes, you talked about that.
Edith hadn't gotten started. She did her work by a private correspondence school.
Yes.
She wasn't at all shy about doing that.
Now, we've talked about that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't want to lose a point I just thought of. When you came here, perhaps most of all the conversations on Lindsborg, like let's say downtown, was probably 90% Swedish, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
And then gradually, English became more prevalent.
Uh-huh.
Were any of the just, let's say, how about in the schools? Was Swedish, I don't know what my question is. In the schools, English surely had to be the predominant language.
As far as I was concerned, when we came to Lindsborg and I went to the academy,
No classes
Swedish
wasn't spoken?
unless you enrolled for Swedish, you never spoke any Swedish. And Sweet Pete, he was a humorous guy, and he could make sport of anybody downgrading any group of any kind. And I like Sweet Pete awfully well. He was just so humorous. His wife was extremely Swedish. And so at home they just talk Swedish between them all the time.
Now then, Swedish was predominant language in the Bethany Church until the 30s.
And while we were still there, every year we voted on Dr. Virgine's having one English sermon during the month. And we voted it down time and again. And do you know why?
He didn't speak English well.
He couldn't handle the language well enough. And Dr. Virgin, as long as he lived, would write out his sermons in Swedish and stand in the pulpit and translate them. And he was able to do that, but there were words that came to him, and he had to. And Edith and I laughed on several of occasions when he got hung up on a word and what he used for a substitute. I don't remember what now, but he wasn't that free with his language.
The Messiah Church, was it, at its inception, was it English speaking, the very beginning?
At College Church.
It was not called Messiah Church.
College, it was because the college professors who were Lutherans all went to the Messiah Church.
But was it English speaking entirely?
English speaking entirely.
From its very beginning?
From the very beginning. There never was any Swedish at all.
Okay, now that brings up a point I want to ask. Could it have been Ruth Virgine's opinion that they were heathen over Messiah? Could it have been because they didn't speak Swedish?
I don't know. That is a new thought to me.
I'm just
completely.
It just popped into my.
Now, when you say it, Mrs. Virgin might have come up with an idea like that, but I don't think it originated with the girls or with Dr. Virgin.
Well, see, sometimes we question what we don't understand.
Yeah.
And maybe English was coming in, and maybe Mrs. Virgin was not fluent in English. Maybe she couldn't speak it at all.
She didn't. She spoke it after a little, but I can't recall ever having heard her speak it.
So it could have been the language could have separated them more than anything.
Yeah, I think so.
It wasn't anything doctrinal?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it had a thing to do with doctrine.
In the synod then, the old Augustine Synod, it would have probably been, and I don't know what this was called, the Central State Synod, I guess, or I'm not sure what it was in those early days, but they probably referred to the two churches in Lindsborg as the English church and the Swedish church.
Yeah.
Could that not have been?
That could very well have been the common trend. Bethany Church, the Swedish church.
Messiah Church?
Messiah Church, the English church.
And English College Church.
Yeah. That I'm sure that they had those two denotations.
So that's why the two churches served a purpose. They didn't just split because of being split.
No.
They each served its own purpose.
They were trying to serve the people that were not being served. And as far as we were concerned, when Dad had gotten to know Pastor Olson well enough and was sufficiently learned in the English language, having heard it often enough, he was perfectly willing to sit through an English sermon. Whereas before, in the days when he knew very little English, he knew English well enough to visit with people and all, but what would come up in the sermon, he wasn't familiar with the Bible
Mm-hmm.
in those terms. And as time went on, and he had an English Bible around, and he would read, he was equally well versed in either language.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mhm.
what I always felt.
Here's a question maybe you never thought of. I'm just going to bounce it off of you. When your dad came to Lindsborg, it was kind of refreshing to have so many Swedes around to talk with, because Swedish was his native language.
Yeah.
Maybe he just enjoyed. In Longmont, there weren't that many
No.
Swedes to talk with.
There weren't. The best Swedes were way out there in the Rin area and out beyond.
Mhm. But
and, the Nelsons, a few over there towards Fremont.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that both Dad and George, when they came here, they enjoyed talking Swedish to the people here.
And in those days, Swedish was 90% of the street talk then.
Yeah, you would go down the street and they'd be talking Swedish all the time.
In fact, a person who spoke only English just didn't feel comfortable here, probably.
No, of course not.
They weren't understood. It was like a strange foreign language, foreign country.
I know that both your dad and Edith said that many times, that the people here that don't understand Swedish, they would feel very uncomfortable walking down the street.
Okay, invariably, there would have been Bethany students who spoke only English.
Uh-huh.
They wouldn't have felt very comfortable downtown,
Yeah.
would they? They would have been kept to themselves on the campus mostly.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
I think very much so.
And then gradually the change came.
Yeah, it just worked itself in from the bottom upwards.
Mhm.
And awful lot of that never once entered our thinking.
Now you're thinking about it.
All of a sudden it was here.
Uh-huh.
It was part of us.
Well, the reason I'm asking these questions, 100 years from now, someone's going to find this interesting to hear you talk about it.
Yeah.
Because maybe no one else has ever spoken it just in this way.
No, that's quite certain. No, I have. There hasn't been anybody that really has intrigued me enough and got me started talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not averse to talking about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectly willing.
Edna, are you getting tired?
And not anymore while I can stay awake.
Well, there can't be very much time on this
Well, you want to hold out till the end?
tape. It couldn't be
You want
more.
to start a new topic?
It couldn't be more.
Probably in violation of law in some areas right now, allowing all the illegal aliens enrolled in college to receive in-state tuition rates means that while American citizens from 49 other states have to pay out of state tuition rates to send their kids to the University of Alabama or Virginia, people who have illegally immigrated into this country might not. Out-of-state tuition rates range from 2 to 3.5 times what in-state tuition rates are. It's always struck me that one of the things you do to encourage people to come here legally, to abide by the law, is you don't give benefits to those who come illegally. It's one thing not to prosecute them. It's one thing not to take them out of the country, but to give them benefits that people who do the right thing get. We shouldn't do that. It's just bad policy. So what about loans in the DREAM Act? And I think this is still in the bill. We haven't had a chance to know all. This was in the DREAM Act originally. I don't know if it's still in there. I assume it is. Under Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965 as amended, legal permanent residents and certain other eligible non-citizens receive federal student financial aid, including Pell Grants and Stafford student loans. That's part of the 1965 Act. The committee bill will add illegal students, illegal alien volunteers and illegal alien military members to the list of people eligible by changing their immigration status to that of a legal permanent resident. This change in status would make them eligible for federal financial aid. Pell Grants and Stafford loans currently comprise 85% of post-secondary student aid available to citizens and eligible non-citizens. In FY02, 8.8% of the individuals receiving Pell Grants were eligible non-citizens. A number over 380,000 people. Now, you know, you want to help people and be generous, but if you're on an illegal status, I don't see why there's an obligation to give the same extra benefits that you do to those who are lawfully here. Pell Grants. The federal Pell Grant program is the single largest source of grant aid for post-secondary education funded by the federal government. There is already a current FY Pell Grant, a fiscal year Pell Grant shortfall of over $2.5 billion. We're short. We have done a lot of different things to try to get the money as high as we can get it this year. The fiscal year 2003 estimated program costs are approximately $12.5 billion. The annual appropriations is $11.4 billion. Now we want to open up Pell Grants to illegal aliens. Although Pell Grants are a discretionary program, the cost of increasing the number of eligible recipients is an award year is considered direct spending when the appropriations and maximum grant award for that year is set in law and a payment schedule is published. Thus, we could be facing a budget point of order with this bill. In other words, since in a number of these instances, the right to have a Pell Grant for qualifying persons is an entitlement. By making more people eligible for this entitlement could subject this bill to a budget point of order. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that 58,500 additional Pell Grants would have been given within 1 year if last year's DREAM Act had passed, with an average grant being $2,420. How many people don't get a dime? They try to send their kids to college, out of state maybe. People have worked hard all their life, middle-class Americans, they don't get a dime. But somebody that's here illegally gets $2,400. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that is being insensitive to the legitimate interest of people who want to come to America, to want to participate in the American dream, or inhumane in any way. What about Stafford loans? The Congressional Budget Office estimated under last year's DREAM Act, the one that was offered last year but did not pass, 65,000 would enroll during the first year and meet all other criteria because 1 in 10 students borrow student loans. Student loan costs would increase by $22 million per year over the 2003-2012 period. $22 million per year. While we were going about our business in committee, we had offered to the bill, the Ag Jobs Bill. Well, we had a big fight on the Ag Jobs Bill last year. It was offered on the floor of the Senate. Senator Saxby Chambliss of Georgia, chairman of the Agriculture Committee, opposed the bill, offered a number of important amendments, I thought, that made it far more sane, far more appropriate, and the bill didn't pass after a great deal of debate. Well, in about 15 minutes in the committee, Senator Feinstein offered the Ag Jobs Bill to the Specter Bill, the committee bill. It was a 106-page amendment. It put 1.5 million illegal alien agriculture workers on a direct path to citizenship, just like that. How does it do it? After the Feinstein Amendment, 1.5 million illegal alien workers who pay a $500 fine and demonstrate they worked in agriculture for 150 work days in the last 2 years will be given blue cards and allowed to stay in the United States, because a work day is defined as 1 hour of work per day. An alien who worked in agriculture for 150 hours, there are 168 hours in a